Book 1, Chapter 55 of Resurrection. Through a door, at the back of the room, entered, with a wriggling gait, the thin, yellow Vera Doukhova, with her large, kind eyes. "Thanks for having come," she said, pressing Nekhludoff's hands. "Do you remember me? Let us sit down." "I did not expect to see you like this." "Oh, I am very happy. It is so delightful, that I desire nothing better," said Vera Doukhova, with the usual expression of fright in the large, kind, round eyes fixed on Nekhludoff, and twisting the terribly thin, sinewy neck, surrounded by the shabby, crumpled, dirty collar of her bodice. Nekhludoff asked her how she came to be in prison. In answer she began relating all about her affairs with great animation. Her speech was intermingled with a great many long words, such as propaganda, disorganization, social groups, sections and subsections, about which she seemed to think everybody knew, but which Nekhludoff had never heard of. She told him all the secrets of the Narodovolstvo, literally People's Freedom, a revolutionary movement, evidently convinced that he was pleased to hear them. Nekhludoff looked at her miserable little neck, her thin, unkempt hair, and wondered why she had been doing all these strange things, and why she was now telling all this to him. He pitied her, but not as he had pitied Menshov, the peasant, kept for no fault of his own in the stinking prison. She was pitiable because of the confusion that filled her mind. It was clear that she considered herself a heroine, and was ready to give her life for a cause, though she could hardly have explained what that cause was, and in what its success would lie. The business that Vera Doukhova wanted to see Nekhludoff about was the following. A friend of hers, who had not even belonged to their subgroup, as she expressed it, had been arrested with her about 5 months before, and imprisoned in the Petropolovsky fortress because some prohibited books and papers, which she had been asked to keep, had been found in her possession. Vera Doukhova felt herself in some measure to blame for her friend's arrest, and implored Nekhludoff, who had connections among influential people, to do all he could in order to set this friend free. Besides this, Doukhova asked him to try to get permission for another friend of hers, Gurkevich, who was also imprisoned in the Petropolovsky fortress, to see his parents, and to procure some scientific books which he required for his studies. Nekhludoff promised to do what he could when he went to Petersburg. As to her own story, this is what she said. Having finished a course of midwifery, she became connected with a group of adherents to the Narodovolstvo, and made up her mind to agitate in the revolutionary movement. At first all went on smoothly. She wrote proclamations and occupied herself with propaganda work in the factories. Then, an important member having been arrested, their papers were seized and all concerned were arrested. I was also arrested and shall be exiled. But what does it matter? I feel perfectly happy. She concluded her story with a piteous smile. Nekhludoff made some inquiries concerning the girl with the prominent eyes. Vera Doukhova told him that this girl was the daughter of a general, and had been long attached to the revolutionary party, and was arrested because she had pleaded guilty to having shot a gendarme. She lived in a house with some conspirators, where they had a secret printing press. One night, when the police came to search this house, the occupiers resolved to defend themselves, put out the light, and began destroying the things that might incriminate them. The police forced their way in, and one of the conspirators fired, and mortally wounded a gendarme. When an inquiry was instituted, this girl said that it was she who had fired, although she had never had a revolver in her hands, and would not have hurt a fly, and she kept to it, and was now condemned to penal servitude in Siberia. An altruistic, fine character, said Vera Doukhova approvingly. The third business that Vera Doukhova wanted to talk about concerned Maslova. She knew, as everybody does know in prison, the story of Maslova's life and his connection with her, and advised him to take steps to get her removed into the political prisoners' ward, or into the hospital to help to nurse the sick, of which there were very many at that time, so that extra nurses were needed. Nekhludoff thanked her for the advice, and said he would try to act upon it. End of Book 1, Chapter 55. Book 1, Chapter 56 of Resurrection. Their conversation was interrupted by the inspector, who said that the time was up, and the prisoners and their friends must part. Nekhludoff took leave of Vera Doukhova and went to the door, where he stopped to watch what was going on. The inspector's order called forth only heightened animation among the prisoners in the room, but no one seemed to think of going. Some rose and continued to talk standing, some went on talking without rising. A few began crying and taking leave of each other. The mother and her consumptive son seemed especially pathetic. The young fellow kept twisting his bit of paper, and his face seemed angry, so great were his efforts not to be infected by his mother's emotion. The mother, hearing that it was time to part, put her head on his shoulder and sobbed and sniffed aloud. The girl with the prominent eyes, Nekhludoff could not help watching her, was standing opposite the sobbing mother, and saying something to her in a soothing tone. The old man with the blue spectacles stood holding his daughter's hand, and nodding in answer to what she said. The young lovers rose, and holding each other's hands, looked silently into one another's eyes. "They are the only two who are merry," said a young man with a short coat, who stood by Nekhludoff's side, also looking at those who were about to part, and pointed to the lovers. Feeling Nekhludoff's and the young man's eyes fixed on them, the lovers, the young man with the rubber coat and the pretty girl, stretched out their arms, and with their hands clasped in each other's, danced round and round again. "Tonight they are going to be married here in prison, and she will follow him to Siberia," said the young man. "What is he?" "A convict, condemned to penal servitude. Let those two at least have a little joy, or else it is too painful," the young man added, listening to the sobs of the consumptive lad's mother. "Now, my good people, please do not oblige me to have recourse to stern measures," the inspector said, repeating the same words several times over. "Do please," he went on in a weak, hesitating manner. "It is high time." "What do you mean by it? This sort of thing is quite impossible. I am now asking you for the last time," he repeated wearily, now putting out his cigarette and then lighting another. It was evident that, artful, old, and common as were the devices enabling men to do evil to others without feeling responsible for it, the inspector could not but feel conscious that he was one of those who were guilty of causing the sorrow which manifested itself in this room, and it was apparent that this troubled him sorely. At length the prisoners and their visitors began to go, the first out of the inner, the latter out of the outer door. The man with the rubber jacket passed out among them, and the consumptive youth and the dishevelled man, Mary Pavlovna, went out with a boy born in prison. The visitors went out too. The old man with the blue spectacles, stepping heavily, went out, followed by Nekhludoff. "Yes, a strange state of things this," said the talkative young man, as if continuing an interrupted conversation, as he descended the stairs side by side with Nekhludoff. "Yet we have reason to be grateful to the inspector, who does not keep strictly to the rules. Kind-hearted fellow. If they can get a talk, it does relieve their hearts a bit, after all." While talking to the young man, who introduced himself as Medinzev, Nekhludoff reached the hall. There the inspector came up to them with weary step. "If you wish to see Maslova," he said, apparently desiring to be polite to Nekhludoff. "Please come tomorrow." "Very well," answered Nekhludoff, and hurried away, experiencing more than ever that sensation of moral nausea which he always felt on entering the prison. The sufferings of the evidently innocent Menshoff seemed terrible, and not so much his physical suffering as the perplexity, the distrust in the good and in God which he must feel, seeing the cruelty of the people who tormented him without any reason. Terrible were the disgrace and sufferings cast on these hundreds of guiltless people simply because something was not written on paper as it should have been. Terrible were the brutalized jailers, whose occupation was to torment their brothers, and who were certain that they were fulfilling an important and useful duty. But most terrible of all seemed this sickly, elderly, kind-hearted inspector, who was obliged to part mother and son, father and daughter, who were just the same sort of people as he and his own children. "What is it all for?" Nekhludoff asked himself, and could not find an answer. End of Book 1, Chapter 56.